What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. The second night of week one has already gotten this new season out to a wild start. Of course, all of the marquee games that everybody's going to have their eyes on are being played today. You're probably watching this early Saturday morning, so you're about to see Texas versus Ohio State, LSU versus Clemson, but the first two nights have been pretty eventful. Colorado, we got our first look at Deion Sanders and the Buffs without Shedeur and Travis, and they fell on the losing side of things, losing 27-20 to Georgia Tech. We'll dive into that game because I perfectly predicted how that game was going to play out. Not to toot my own horn, but, we had questions about the identity of Colorado's offense. How are they going to look without two of the greatest players in the history of their program? And we got some answers to that. Nebraska, I know it seems to be criminal to talk about both Nebraska and Colorado on the same episode, but Colorado, they have a lot of hype, but Nebraska, they have just as much hype as what Colorado has this season. Josh Pate recently released his CFB predictions, and he had Nebraska getting in, and the potential of Nebraska could be 10-2. They make it to the Big Ten title game potentially, and even if they don't get in, they could make the playoffs as a 10th or 11th seed, maybe pull off an upset or two and be this year's Cinderella story in college football. What did we learn about Nebraska after their gritty week one win? Auburn, they got a pressure reliever tonight taking down Baylor in pretty convincing fashion. You got to be really encouraged about Auburn's performance if you're a fan of the Tigers, considering the hot seat that Hugh Freeze is on right now. And we'll also talk about the new coaching era that is taking over college football that Deion Sanders has influenced, and the truth about the college football playoffs that we need to address when it comes to picking the 12 best teams in America. Does a team from a group of five conference fit that criteria? If you are ready for the Saturday slate of games to be played, make sure that you hit that like button and subscribe, man, because we're going to have you covered. We're going to have content dropping galore, takeaways, reactions, predictions. It's a great time to be a fan of football right now. It feels like we just got Christmas and the final days of August. If you don't want the starting quarterback of your favorite team this year to play like Anthony Richardson, give us a 5-star review, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. JT Sports is available. Links are down in the description and pinned comment below. Let me know what team you're repping this season. I'm a Miami Hurricanes fan. Yeah, that's right. I'm repping them Canes, baby. And if you're going to come at me about them Canes, hey, I need to know what team you're repping so I can come at you when your team ends up slipping, man. We're a family over here, man. But let's dive into it. Colorado falls 27-20 to open the season up against Georgia Tech. The identity of Colorado, what they were going to be on offense this season, was a big question that I had. When you lose Shedeur Sanders and you replace him with Caden Salters, who's a completely different style of quarterback, you are going to have to completely change the not just philosophy of your offense, but the scheme of your offense as well to fit the new identity that Deion Sanders wants this team to have, which is he wants them to, instead of being the track team that they've been for his first two seasons, he wants them to actually be able to win the battle up front. He wants them to be able to impose their will, impose their physicality between the tackles. And you obviously could tell that they were able to do some of the things that they are hoping to do this season in this game, as far as the improvement that you saw on the ground. They had well over 150 rushing yards in this game. This is the best performance that Colorado has ever had, hands down, running the football under Deion Sanders. So you like what you saw as far as that. And that's what Colorado's offense is going to be predicated on this year, running the football. This is no longer going to be an air raid team where they just are going to sling the football 30, 40 times a game to win it. No, Colorado, what's going to determine how good this team is going to be this year is going to be predicated off their ability to successfully run the football. And in this game, their offense had a lot of struggles once they weren't able to get the short field position that Georgia Tech gifted them from the 3 early turnovers that they had. When Colorado had to drive the length of the field and the ground game wasn't there and they had to throw the football to do so, they had some struggles. Now, I like Kaden Salters a lot. I believe that Kaden Salters is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in college football this year, but the passing game definitely looked a little rusty in this game. Now, that's not to say that there weren't some good moments that Kaden Salters and the passing attack had in this game. He had a nice dime that he threw and cover 2 to a Marion Miller. You know, there was some nice plays that the passing game had tonight, but it definitely is a work in progress. And when you have a new quarterback and a new system, you completely change up your system for what you've done in years past with new receivers, there's going to be some clumps there. And overall, the offense from Colorado was what you expected it to kind of look like in week 1. It should get better, but it definitely is encouraging to finally see some success running the football. The second part of Colorado's identity, they want to be physical on offense, but on defense, they want to maintain that same level of physicality. And that starts with being able to be good against the run, which Colorado was not tonight. Georgia Tech ran for 300 and a million rushing yards against Colorado's defense. They struggled to tackle. Guys were breaking loose every time they got into the open field. Georgia Tech's receivers were really good with the ball in their hands after the catch. Jamal Haynes, Georgia Tech's running back, he just seemed to be unstoppable. Colorado's defense was allergic every time he ran the football. Haynes King, though, he may not be the best athlete in the world, but he just runs with a savviness about him that makes him really dangerous. And he had 150 rushing yards tonight. He's like a running back disguised as a quarterback because the way he just hits the hole, the way he can just wiggle through guys, wiggle around guys, is just very impressive. And it gave Colorado's defense a lot of problems. And I don't think that Colorado is going to be a bad team on a defensive line this year. I just think that Georgia Tech was a more physical team than what Colorado was in this game. That's what Georgia Tech's brand of football is. Colorado struggles against physical teams. Last year, they got beat up by Kansas and BYU late down the stretch. And this season, they still have the same problem. They're not able to hold up front, and they're not able to maintain their level of physicality when they go up against teams that want to scrap with you, teams that have no problem winning a ugly, low-scoring affair. Although this was a 27-27 final, this kind of felt like one of those old-school defensive slugfests. It's a bunch of running the football, not a bunch of flashy plays being made in the passing game. That's what this game was. Georgia Tech, on their final possession, when they were able to get Haynes King loose and he was finally able to break a big one, that was the physicality of Georgia Tech coming down to play. Yeah, for the first 3 quarters, they weren't really getting as many big ones as what they might have liked, but in the fourth quarter, that's when they started to get those knockout blows. That's when you started to see the talent and depth that Georgia Tech had up front wear down on Colorado. And Colorado, their clock management was horrendous and their final possession in this loss against Georgia Tech. I love Deion Sanders, but you got to hold him accountable for the awful clock management that he had. You have a minute and 8 seconds left with 2 timeouts, and you don't use any of the timeouts at all. Clock management is something that I think if you're a head coach on any level, college football, NFL, it's inexcusable for this to be a bad aspect of your game as a head coach. You can learn basic clock management just playing a few games of Madden. Deion Sanders, the clock management was a big Achilles heel for them last season, and it still is a big Achilles heel that Colorado still happens to have. And when you don't have Shedeur Sanders, there is a lot of uncomfortability that Deion Sanders has with Caden Salters as far as how much he really trusts Caden Salters to go out there and win the game. We know that Caden Salters can go out there and be a baller, but with the game on the line, does Deion Sanders trust Caden Salters to win the game with his arm as much as he trusted Shedeur? It didn't really look like that in this game. And I think that down the stretch, we will see Caden Salters get a lot better as a passer. And I really like what we got out of Caden Salters tonight. I had a lot of friends that would hit me up during this game saying, who is this Caden Salter dude? He's not that good. I was like, I don't know what y'all watching. I like what we got out of Caden Salters. I thought that he was good at extending plays. When guys were able to penetrate the offensive line, he was able to make a guy or two miss. He looked really dynamic. I think Caden Salters is going to be a really good player for Colorado. But their new identity definitely got tested in this game, and it didn't really pan out with the win, but there's certainly so much that you can take away from the first game of the season. I still think there's a lot to be hopeful about in terms of what Colorado can do in the Big 12. They lost to what should be a really good Georgia Tech team this year. If you don't want the starting quarterback of your favorite team to play like Anthony Richardson, go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, check us out, JT Sports, on all podcasting platforms. Give us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. Let's get back to the video. Auburn wins against Baylor, 38-24. It's the final. This was a must-win game for Hugh Freeze to start his 3rd season at Auburn. There are not too many coaches that are under more pressure than what Hugh Freeze currently is under this year. He has to win what feels like at least 7 games to survive for a 4th season. And this was a pop quiz for the bigger exam that Auburn has coming up in the next 3 weeks, when they have a tough 3-game stretch against Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Georgia. How they looked in this game against Baylor was going to go a long way to the confidence you were going to have about the success that this season could possibly be. And I felt you should be ecstatic if you're an Auburn fan. Defensively, the defense has a lot to improve on. But offensively, which was the bigger question that you had in this game coming in, that was answered with flying colors. This was not really a pretty performance from a box score standpoint out of Auburn's offense. It wasn't flashy. They just went to old reliable, which was the ground game. Jackson Arnold, he made his debut starting for Auburn at quarterback, and his legs were a huge reason why Auburn's offense dominated the way that they did. He had 137 yards and no turnovers. Big question about Jackson Arnold. How well can he take care of the football? Against Oklahoma, when everything went wrong for him, turnovers were at the forefront of it. And it's funny how the best game that Jackson Arnold had at Oklahoma was against Alabama late during the season. They won that game with how good Jackson Arnold was on the ground running the ball. And I'm not just talking about scrambling on passing plays. I'm talking about actually using Jackson Arnold to run the football on design quarterback runs, that's when Oklahoma somewhat has some success with Jackson Arnold. Auburn, they took that same recipe that led Jackson Arnold to having the best game of the season last year against Alabama, and they used that blueprint in this game against Baylor. There was a lot of creativity with Jackson Arnold on the ground. Hugh Freeze had quarterback counters, quarterback draws, zone reads, power runs, QB power, you name it. Any kind of quarterback run that you can think of, Auburn ran with Hugh Freeze in this game. Now, is this sustainable for Auburn this season? Can they win games with Jackson Arnold going 12 of 23 passing, 123 yards through the air, but 127 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns? Can this level of quarterback play, being run first, pass second, win you 8-9 games potentially this year? We'll see. This is one of the best offensive lines that Auburn has had in over a decade in terms of just pure talent. And those big boys, they were working against Baylor's defensive line. But how much of this was just the talent advantage that the SEC teams have over teams playing in a non-Power 2 conferences? And how good is this offensive line going to look when you end up going up against a Oklahoma, A&M, a Georgia defensive line? What we learned from Auburn and this win over Baylor is that they're a competent offense. They know what they want to be this year, which is a run-first team, get Jackson Arnold going with his legs. We only are going to throw the football when we have to. Our offensive line is going to be able to move guys around, to create those opportunities, to have success rushing the football. But if Auburn has to win throwing the ball, if they end up getting into a hole early and they have to come back from behind, can Jackson Arnold's arm get that done? This is a big season for Nebraska. This is Matt Rhule's 3rd season as Nebraska's head coach. If you don't know the backstory, everywhere that Matt Rhule has been in college football, everywhere he's coached, he's had a lot of success in this 3rd season, which is why the potential for Nebraska this year is extremely high. How good Nebraska could be and where this program could be in December has a lot of people, not just in Nebraska's fan base, excited, but in the national media excited. Josh Pate, he just put out his CFP projections. He has Nebraska getting in. Maybe they can go 10-2, be a Cinderella team in the playoffs, pull up an upset in the first and second round. How they looked against Cincinnati was going to go a long way to figuring out what this team was going to be and what this team has the potential to be in Matt Rhule's 3rd season, and they answered the test. Yeah, it was a closer game than what you probably would have thought it was going to be coming in. Nebraska was a 6.5-point favorite at kickoff, and they went 2017 against a Cincinnati team that showed a lot of fight. But despite Nebraska's win over Cincinnati not being pretty, what we know about this team is now that they can win one-possession games. For over the last 6 years, Nebraska has been the worst one-possession team in college football. They went 7-6 last year. 5 out of 6 of those losses came in one-score games. And when Nebraska got up by 10 points and Cincinnati came back and they cut the lead from 10-3, you started getting a little bit of PTSD for Nebraska. You were kind of saying, here we go again. We're struggling to close out a team in the 4th quarter. Is this going to be the same misfortune that we've seen in these first 2 seasons under Matt Rhule? It wasn't. Nebraska, they were able to seal this game late. They got a game-sealing interception. The play calling and the handling of that situation by Cincinnati was really bad. You're trying to get home run shots, when you're in field goal range, play for overtime. If it's not there, don't force it. But Nebraska's defense answered the call. There's a lot of teams that would have dropped that interception. So Nebraska, we know that this is a team that has the ability to close out games. They're physical. They're going to run the football. You know what's coming from Nebraska this year. They're going to run the football, which seems boring to watch. Nobody wants to watch a team just run it 30, 40 times a game. But that's what Nebraska is, and that's kind of what you have to be to win in the Big Ten. The best teams in the Big Ten are always the ones that can run the football successfully. That's what Nebraska can do at a really high level. Running back Emmett Johnson had 108 rushing yards in this game on 25 carries. He was really good at making guys miss and creating extra yards after contact. The passing game, though, Dylan Raiola. If Nebraska makes it to the playoffs and they win 10 games and they live up to their potential, Dylan Raiola is going to be a finalist in New York for the Heisman Trophy. What we saw from him against Cincinnati was a way more different, more comfortable quarterback throwing the football than what he was as a true freshman last year. He's more patient in the pocket with waiting for guys to get open. He's not quick to bail out of the pocket. He'll step up. He trusts his footwork. He trusts his offensive line a lot more. And the biggest improvement, which just completely bounced off the screen for me, was the ball placement, the touch on the ball that Dylan Raiola now has when the ball comes out of his hands. He threw a dime to one of Nebraska's receivers, Neziah Hunter, in the red zone for a tutty, and it was just an absolutely beautiful ball that he put in only a position that his receiver could go get it. He gets joked on for imitating Patrick Mahomes. I don't see anything wrong with it. There's not anybody better to impersonate than arguably the greatest quarterback in NFL history. If there ever was a guy that you want to replicate and be like, and you want to mirror everything that he does, from his haircut, what he does off the field, his playing style, Patrick Mahomes is the way to go. If Nebraska can just get 70% of Patrick Mahomes and Dylan Raiola, the limit for this team is limitless. They could go from being a 6-7 win team to probably being a 10-win team that wins a playoff game or two. They end up being the new Cinderellas of college football. This Nebraska team, what we know about them early is that this is a team that isn't built to win with a lot of style points. They're going to win a bunch of 24, 20, 17, 13 kind of games. They're a run-heavy team that they can throw the football when they need to, but their cup of tea is just running it, winning time of possession, dominating the line of scrimmage, proving that they're going to be the more physical team than you, and relying on good defense. And that's the identity that the previous teams that Matt Rule has coached on have all had when they've had a lot of success in his third season. It took us only 2 games to get the first upset of this season. Boise State got blasted 34-7 on the road against USF. This game not only has damaging implications on Boise State's playoff chances, but it also has a damaging impact on the rest of the group of 5 in terms of how we perceive the G5 when we are picking the 12-team field for the playoffs. The committee always says that their goal is to pick the 12 best teams in college football to make the playoffs. Can we truly say that if we're picking any team from the G5 this year that we have one of the best 12 teams in college football? Now, I'm not saying that no G5 team is ever truly capable of being one of the best 12 teams in college football, but last year Boise State got into the playoffs, and the whole purpose of putting them in and giving them a first round bye was they played Oregon tough and they got a ranked win over UNLV. If we are going to put G5 teams in the playoffs and give them an automatic seat at the table that could be used for a Big 12 team or ACC that wins 10 games, got a few ranked wins during the process, but a few ugly losses, they could have a right to that last spot. That G5 team gets an automatic spot. You know, what about if there is a 3-loss SEC team that played a tougher schedule, that has more bigger wins than what that G5 team has, but since that G5 team has an automatic seat at the table, they essentially have stole a seed from a team that could have been more deserving. And my question for the college football playoffs is the objective to put the 12 best teams in the tournament to decide who truly is the best team in college football, and that's who that national champion is? Or are we just having a feel-good invitational? Because if you're lying to me, that lie includes you saying we have the best 12 teams in America, with one of those 12 teams coming from the G5. We no longer are going to have 2011 a Boise State, 2012 Cincinnati. NIL, the transfer portal, has killed that. Years ago, you would see better G5 teams because the group of 5 wasn't a farm league for the elites. Alabama, Georgia, Oregon, anytime they have a hole on their team that they need a quick fix to fill, they just go right on down to Boise State, FAU, USF, and they just snatch up their best player. They snatch up the best players out of the G5. The G5, they get guys that were under-recruited, that were overlooked coming out of high school. They develop them for 2-3 years. Then when they end up being really good players, they end up getting a bigger bag to go play for the big boys. That's why I propose this to you, that we need to take away the G5 getting an automatic bid into the playoffs when we expand to 14 or 16 teams. The best teams in college football don't play G5 football. The best teams all play in Power 4 conferences. And if there is a G5 team that is one of the best in college football that truly deserves to be in the playoffs, they need to have a schedule that is the equivalent to the teams in the Power 4. They got to have a few ranked wins, and their losses can't be too bad. You got to be able to be a team like FAU that schedules a team like a Notre Dame or Clemson, and you're out of conference and you're able to beat them, because that overrides you having a weak conference schedule. That overrides you not having the same competition in your conference as some of the other teams that you're getting into the playoffs over. And with Boise State losing to USF, the pool that we're going to be picking from to see which G5 team ends up being in the playoffs, I don't think any of these teams have a shot at giving whoever they play in the first or second round a competitive playoff game. Boise State, Penn State wasn't even close last year. And look how bad Boise State looked without Ashton Jeanty. This just proves that the G5 getting an automatic seed in the playoffs makes this a participation tournament. That's what this is. You can't say that we have the best teams in the nation if you have one of those teams being from the G5. If one of these G5 teams actually deserves to be in, they need to have a conference that shows they deserve to be in. Deion Sanders has ushered in a new era in college football. Ever since he got hired by Colorado to be their head coach, he's brought a lot of attention, publicity, and revenue to this program and this community. So a lot of teams have seen the success that Deion Sanders has had, a big name from the NFL world, one of the most recognizable athletes in the history of sports. And he has not just brought energy to Colorado, but he also has improved this football program. So a bunch of other teams, a bunch of other programs that are a lot smaller than Colorado, they're trying to copy and paste this same blueprint. They're trying to get a guy that has a lot of notoriety from the NFL, rather it's a coach or a player, and they hope that making one of these guys their head coach not only will bring them a bunch of attention and interject them a quick spark of energy, but also this will help sell their football program. Thursday night, the first night of week 1, I saw several former NFL players making their debuts as college football head coaches. Michael Vick, Deshaun Jackson, they're head coaches at HBCUs, which I'm not trying to say that Deshaun Jackson doesn't know X's and O's. I just never thought that I would see Deshaun Jackson ever being a head coach. Michael Vick, more so understandable because he's a former quarterback, and a lot of former quarterbacks tend to become head coaches. Then Eddie George, who's a NFL Hall of Fame running back, he's the new head coach of Bowling Green. He won his debut. He was the head coach of Tennessee State for a few years ago, and he kind of was the first former Hall of Fame NFL player to kind of benefit off the hiring of Deion Sanders at Jackson State, then at Colorado. So Deion Sanders has made a lot of programs obsessed with trying to recapture what Deion Sanders brought to Boulder when he first got that job. And the issue with this approach of all of these programs trying to be copycats of Deion Sanders and Colorado's situation, hiring these celebrity coaches, it plays into a popular narrative that I often see on X a lot, that if you weren't a good player, how can you possibly be a good football coach? How can you develop guys? How can you put guys in situations to blossom and turn into great players when you weren't a great player yourself? And that's always a valid question, and the answer seems to make a lot of sense. You know, if it is that way, that some folks use the logic to use when they pose this question to you, thinking it's a got you thing, and you come back and you tell them the majority of the best coaches ever never played football or they weren't that good at football, then it debunks that question entirely, and it debunks the perception that just because you were a good player means that you're going to be a good head coach. No, it doesn't. Being a great player and being a great head coach requires two different skill sets. It's one thing to be a good player of the game, but it's another thing to be a good teacher of the game. Can you teach players the same things that made you great? Can you teach players how to get open on a 3rd and 7? Can you teach a player where to go once his second read is blocked off and he has nowhere else to throw the football to if you're Michael Vick? These are the skill sets and the traits that you need as a head coach that you don't necessarily have when you're a former player. Bill Belichick, him being a celebrity coach in college football will work only due to his experience and the background he has being a head coach in the NFL, which Bill Belichick just isn't some random guy from the NFL world. This is the greatest head coach in the history of football. This is an 8-time Super Bowl champion, 6 times as a head coach and 2 times as an assistant. So it's not like Bill Belichick is just another washed head coach from the NFL ranks that's coming down to college football. No, this is the most accomplished coach in the history of football, college football and NFL combined. So let's not be talking down Bill Belichick like he's the same thing as Deion Sanders. The background, the prestige is a lot better compared to Deion's for Bill Belichick. But the other coaches like Deshaun Jackson, Michael Vick, Eddie George, that have this celebrity status, coaching in college football, I think that this new era, it is not going to work out like how a lot of people envision it could work out. You know, the selling point behind these celebrity coaching hires is that if you get a big name that fans in your fan base and boosters, donors within your program recognize and they grew up watching play, they're going to be more willing to put more money into the football program because it's a guy that, because of their name, they can trust. They can get behind Arkansas hiring John Gruden because of what John Gruden did at the NFL stage. North Carolina lowered their academic standards, and they gave Bill Belichick $20 million to use an NIL on his roster. So if you have a celebrity coach with a lot of popularity and status from the NFL, it makes the premise of hiring them intriguing from guys within your program that donate a lot of money, because you're more willing to donate to a name that you recognize than you are to your typical head coaching candidate that had to work his way up the traditional way. Assistant, water boy, coordinator, then eventually he gets his big time gig. These guys that are coming from the NFL world are only getting these head coaching opportunities. They are skipping the line, having no real coaching experience, but they get these jobs because the success they had as a player in the NFL. Like Michael Vick and Deshaun Jackson. These guys have no experience coaching in college football as assistant coach or coordinator, but they got their head coaching opportunities because of what they did as a player due to the success that Deion Sanders has had at Colorado and Jackson State. But the experiment for Deion in Colorado has worked because Deion is one of one. Not every good former NFL player or coach is going to work out in college football. It's just a lot of differences between coaching and playing in the NFL and being able to coach up 19 to 20-year-olds.